So how do we handle interrupts without being a jerk? You want to be able to say no or not now in a polite way. Turns out from a psychological perspective, when someone is interrupting you, we as geeks think what they really want is the request to be satisfied. But actually, psychologically, what they want to be is heard. If they're not heard but get the thing done, they will actually be less satisfied if you don't get it done and tell them that you're not going to get it done. Communication is very important to people psychologically. So how do you say no with compassion? I try to say no with action. If I'm saying no, what I really say is, I'm sorry. I make sure that the person understands that I've heard them. So if someone says, Tom, I need you to install this, I respond, oh, hi, Bob, so you need me to install this. And I just mirror exactly what they said back to them. Now, it might sound like I'm being a jerk, but the person doesn't know that. And what they hear is the person has really acknowledged my request. And also, if I get it wrong, it's an opportunity for them to correct me. It's sort of like using a file transfer protocol. You wouldn't trust a file transfer protocol that didn't send back checksums to make sure the data is getting through correctly. But we think nothing of just hearing some request and dashing off to do it. So we're verifying the request. And I try to visually imply that it's going to get done. So instead of saying, yeah, I'll take care of that this afternoon, while they're standing there, I pull out my PDA and say, yeah, let me make a note of that. Bum, bum, bum. I read it back to them. John needs the software installed, and they acknowledge me, and then I put it down. And by putting down the PDA, that's sort of their signal to leave. And that's really an important part of this. Yes?
So if the interruption is a natural of enemy focus, how do you convey this to the boss who likes to micromanage?
Well, I think you have to be firm and say, I need some time to get this done. People often micromanage because they haven't gotten a lot of management training. And so managing your boss is a little bit difficult. But I find being clear about the deadline and when they'll next hear status. So I'll say, yes, I'll get that done by Saturday, and I'll give you an update tomorrow on my progress. Because now if they come to you between now and tomorrow, then they know that they're micromanaging. Yeah. And if you say, yeah, I said by tomorrow, well, it can be a little annoying. But, I've when I'm angry, I've said stuff like, I'd get more done if you waited for my next status update. Yeah. Yeah.
Years ago, the answer was,
Oh, okay. So he asked a similar question a couple years ago, and I said, you should let him see your to-do list. That's a good idea. I'm glad I thought of it. So, yeah, if you're the organized employee that has a to-do list, and you say, what you're really communicating is, you should have confidence in me. Here's my to-do list. Yes, boss, it's on my to-do list. By the way, this is also what's on my plate. Definitely makes you look better than your coworker who just doesn't have anything written down and is just like, yeah, I'll get to it. But so not only does it give confidence, but they might see that certain things on your plate are stuff that aren't a high priority to him or her, and can reprioritize. I've had bosses say, yes, that's what I want on your plate. I've had situations where they said, oh, you're really overloaded. I'm going to give John that task. Awesome. And I've also had a situation where my boss said, wait, our users ask you to do that? Oh, no, I'm going to go talk to them. They're not allowed to ask you to do that. They have to do their own work. So it can be useful to show your boss your to-do list every once in a while. If you do it every day, they're like, can't manage his own priorities. But, okay. So when you do get a request, try to think about what am I going to do with these three things? Am I going to record it, delegate it, or do it? So instead of chaos, we have a plan. Record, delegate, do. We are going to record it if I'm in the middle of another project, if it's not urgent, and it's not a while you wait request, like resetting a password. And there's a lot of different ways of recording things. You could create a ticket. You could write in PDA. You could tell them to create a ticket. For non-technical people, it's scary to create a ticket. It's like traveling in a foreign country and you don't know the language. So you can relax that fear by telling them what to put in the ticket. And I've told people, oh, create a ticket that just says, give this ticket to Tom, plaid elephant, and I'll know what you mean. And that's good enough. So record, delegate, do. The next would be when to delegate. When someone else can do it and it's too urgent to put off. So maybe in the interrupt shield, they got past the shield somehow and they came to me and I said, oh, Bob's on duty right now. Why don't you talk to him? And if they say, well, Bob's incompetent, I'd rather you do it. I say, well, you really got to go through him. It's his on-duty time. More about delegation. Let's go to when to do it. So when it's an emergency, we talked about the third category of expectations. They expect that in emergencies you will jump up and work on the issue. But it's important to have a written definition of what constitutes an emergency. So at a newspaper, an emergency is anything that will prevent tomorrow's edition from happening on time, that will directly prevent. And things that will, if continue to be ignored, will have a domino effect that will prevent the edition. That's not an emergency. Most businesses have some kind of way of defining an emergency. And getting it in writing can really empower you to know when to say no, and empower your users to know that they can go to your boss for when there's a disagreement. In academic environments, it can be more difficult to define an emergency. It might be related to lab equipment that can't go too long without power or networking, or a grant deadline is going to be missed. So also when to do it. When it's my job to react in this situation. I'm Tom, I'm the backup guy. Someone comes with a backup request, I'm the stucky for that. If it takes less than 2 minutes, I find I have a little 2-minute rule. If someone makes a request and it's going to take less than 2 minutes, it's faster to just do it than write it down and come back to it later and remember what I meant when I wrote that thing down. And lastly, requests from my boss. Requests from my boss tend to be sort of like that password reset situation. My boss isn't asking me for a count of how many ceiling tiles we have in the office just because he loves ceiling tiles. He's setting up something for the budget, and it can't be computed until we have the count of ceiling tiles. Okay, maybe ceiling tiles is a bad example, but my boss once asked me how many machines in our network have less than 1 gig of RAM. Well, he wasn't just curious, he was planning next year's budget where any machine with less than 1 gig of RAM was going to be upgraded. Now you don't want him to be in front of his boss saying, well, here's our proposed budget for next year, except line 7, Limoncelli didn't get me the inventory information yet, so I look like an idiot because I don't know how many RAM sims we're going to have to buy. So requests from my boss always go into the do it category. Anyone guess the other reason why boss requests go top? Yes. Because they pay me. Because they determine my promotions and raises. Yes. If anything, I want you to be able to get raises and be able to afford buying more books. So you can be creative. I saw a sysadmin once in a lab environment, they couldn't use DHCP, so he had the next 10 IP addresses written on a sheet of paper, and if someone came to him needing an IP address, he would tear it off and hand it to them. And then he'd write down the name of the host, and once a day he would do any host updates. So some suggestions there. And that kind of thing is about batching up tasks. So, the other day I was at a restaurant and I was, I'm not going to, in the interest of time, I'll have to tell this story over lunch. Yeah. Oh, sure. You get to delegate? Awesome. When you delegate, it's important to make sure the person has the resources they need and a deadline, and that you have the authority, and they have the authority to do the work. Now, in the mutual interrupt shield, they have the authority because it's usually a peer, and they have all the authority that you have. One thing I do is, not with peers, but with, if it's like the end of the day and I need someone else to do something for me, I explain the deadline, or instead of giving them a deadline, I'll let them suggest a date. And it's usually as good as the deadline I would have given them, but they feel empowered because they set the deadline and they're more motivated to work on something if they feel they have control. Of course, if it's not an acceptable deadline, then we can negotiate. But both ways, they're feeling like they're in control. And I record the deadline on that day's to-do list. Mm-hmm. Talk a lot more about delegation in the afternoon.